who actually make the difference and are the ones who actually implement change in a successful way. So we're going to start here. Just if everyone hasn't already downloaded the worksheet, please do so. Very important. That's part of the webinar, actually part of all of our webinars. We'd like to get you involved in the process, thinking about your world and how today's subject matter will help you. And so there's going to be a few questions. We'll get to that worksheet in a little bit, but you can always download it. It's right on the screen here if you haven't already. Well, let's start with some details. And if you look at some of these topics here from some very well-known business sources, change is not always successful. It's about 30% at best. So that suggesting 60 to 70% of change initiatives are not successful, which can be a little scary, knowing that how much change occurs, whether it's external or internal change. But the key with all of this is making sure that we understand why does this happen, what gets in the way, and how can you, as a leader, be more effective or instrumental in helping the change process. I believe here at Sky that organizations that build a culture of success, build a culture where leaders are training people, teaching people how to adapt to or adopt change, are the organizations that are going to be more successful in the long run. We all are subject to change. It's probably the only thing that we can certainly count on, and this is where leaders need to think about, how do I have an impact? How do I help people? How do I think about different ways of approaching change and challenges that come with that change? So what are the forces driving change? Well, there's many. We break it down into three categories: people, technology, and information. Everybody knows today how different the demographic shifts are. That's causing a pretty significant change in the world, in the business world specifically. Technology itself is driving innovation at a pace that we've never ever seen before, and of course the need and the demand for information, it's global. And these are things that puts pressure on every single organization. And it's not just internal changes, but there are external forces on organizations constantly. These are things that employees, managers, leaders have no impact in terms of affecting the external change. And essentially what that comes down to is this is something that the organization has to deal with and push through. But there's also internal factors that can be very numerous within organizations, and these are changes either responding to the external change, or it could be changes that are being driven throughout the organization for need of innovation, driving different strategies. So there's a constant shift occurring every single day, and it really comes down to individuals in the organization figuring out how to push through this change. And specifically leaders. As you know, everyone knows on the line, our organization focuses on leadership, and the ability to be successful really comes down to those people in the organization who take a leading role in driving that success. So if you think about change, I'm oftentimes asked, how can you help my company? Or what happens when our organization is faced with these problems, and how do we manage through this change? Well, the first thing we have to recognize here is that organizations don't change, people do. People also react to change. And I want to talk about some of the different reactions that we have to face up to. These are things we may not want to think about, but we need to, because if we understand why people react, how they react, and how they're reacting in general, this certainly makes a huge difference. So here are 5 different things or different ways people react. Some people, and oftentimes you have to think about this, everybody is a little different. We all have different motivations or motivators. We react to things differently. Some of us are calm, some of us panic, some of us are very composed, but these are the different ways that people face up to certain changes that happen. And changes as we talked about earlier, feel like they're imposed on each individual. So each individual, if you think about the team of people who you're responsible to, or the people around you, some people are deal with it with anger. Some people see frustration, and anger, and it may not be overt anger, but it could be quiet, passive-aggressive type anger, and people don't like that. There's just plain old resistance. There's a good chunk of the population within your organization, probably about 40 to 50% of the population, that doesn't like change. Doesn't mean they won't change; they just don't like it. And their first inclination is to say, "Wait a minute, why are we changing? Everything is working well, and I really just don't want to change." Which kind of leads into the next topic here, denial. People just saying, "Hey, look, we don't need the change." Those who are just going back to resistance, those who are resisting, want to look for an ROI. Why are we changing? What's the basis for this change? Is it going to pay back? Is the change going to pay us back? Is it going to help me? Is it going to hurt me? There are people out there that just don't care. They're punching the time clock, and they're not dealing with the change, but they don't care if change is happening. They just sort of muddle their way through the day. And then there are those who, and there's probably many of you in the line here, that say, I just accept change. I know it's coming, and I'm just going to deal with it, because it's one of the things we just have to face up to every single day. So think about the people around you and how different people react to different situations, and how you as a leader need to understand each individual on your team or the people around you, and that will drive their behavior. So if in the face of change you see people not doing well with it, coming along slowly, pushing back, digging in their heels, there's a reason for it typically, and oftentimes it's very personal because we all deal with things differently. And a big piece of this is you have to accept that these are all things here. These are all the things people deal with every single day, but you may not know it. And part of this is keeping an open mind, being flexible, and continue with communication. But we'll talk about some of those things in a few moments here. All right, so the question is, do we manage or do we lead change? And of course, you do need both. And there's always the management versus leadership question when it comes to anything related to running a business. But with change, it's absolutely critical. And here's a few things to think about. So managing through change, oftentimes there's planning involved. There's going to be finances involved. There's going to be some sort of impact. Typically, change requires some sort of spend. It's going to cost something. There's a fair amount of organizing and staffing. You have to hire the right people. You have to coordinate. You have to make sure that you have the right structure, reporting structure as well. And then you have to have a certain amount of controls in place, as well as there's going to be a significant amount of problem solving. Now, I say to all the people I work with, manage your business and lead the people. So let's talk about the other side of this equation. Leaders, when you talk about change, think hard about setting the direction. Where are we going? Where are we today, but where are we going? And that helps people in the organization establish a mindset. I mean, a big chunk of this is not intellectual. People understand change. They understand the process. They can read a plan, but it's the emotional and psychological elements that make it tough for people. If you're setting a direction for people, painting a pathway, or establishing a roadmap, people understand that. It's not necessarily easy for them, but they'll see the pathway there, and it makes more sense for them. Aligning people has a lot to do with the plan itself, what is it going to look like, but also how do people need to interact and support one another in the change process. If you think about change today, there's small changes. There might be a reorg within an organization. There could be a major IT implementation. We've all been subject to a major software upgrade or installation that has caused us a tremendous amount of grief. But it could also be business process. It could be the need to align the company more effectively to meet the customer's needs. People get, if you think about change, people struggle with it. A good chunk of it has to do with people are comfortable. They figure out a way to be successful in their role. And when someone says you need to change, there's oftentimes pushback because now you're taking them out of their comfort zone. And then the last item here is motivation and inspiration. Leaders need to motivate and inspire. When you talk about change, you need to allow people to deal with their emotions, deal with whether it's anger or denial or acceptance, whatever it is, and help them through that process. And if you're building strong bonds with your employees to help them through it, they're going to appreciate it, they're going to be more motivated, and essentially they're going to do the work for you, which is really kind of critical. Well, actually, let me back up. They're not doing the work for you, but they're doing the work as a team in conjunction with what is needed. So let's just hit a truth here. Essentially, successful change has mostly to do with leadership, because it's the people who have to change. It's the people who make it happen. And it's only up to 30% management that accounts for successful change. Now, I'm not going to challenge anyone to do the actual math on this, but I think if you think about yourselves as a leader and as someone who has to help manage through change, if you can bring the people with you, you're going to be far, far more successful, because it's easy to change business process. You could bring in a management consultant into a company, analyze a business process, and say, this is a much better way to do it, and push that down on the organization. You're going to get massive change. But if you get people involved in the change process, it's far, far more successful. So for those of you who have been on our webinars before, we always have a segment here, or we always start some point with how this applies to you. It's very important. If anything around change management, there's lots of books out there, there's lots of courses. When I run these webinars, I find it very, very important that I get your mind, your intellectual abilities, as well as your emotional and psychological connection to this, to see how can I make this work for me? How can I apply this? So the first question I have for you, and if you could, and at this point, it might be a good idea to get a hold of the worksheet, because we're going to be going to question number 1. But the first question I have for you is, what changes are you experiencing today? And not you personally, but if you think about your company, your organization, whether it's affecting you directly or even adjacently, it's likely going to be affecting people around you as well as you. So I want you to think about what changes are happening within your organization today. And because I want this to be a starting point. What is it that you should be thinking about that will help you move the organization forward with the least amount of pain? I'm not saying there's a whole lot of pain, but it can be painful or slow, and comes with, what comes with that is frustration for some. But when an organization is moving more smoothly, understands each other, is communicating, it has a tendency to adapt to the change quite effectively. I'm going to give you 45 seconds here to answer question 1. So the question is, what are the changes you are facing, that means your company, or could be facing in the near future, because we like to anticipate change if we can, that is having the greatest impact on your organization? Employees don't like surprises, so if you can anticipate changes, that's a very good thing. So I'm going to give you just a few seconds here and write down a few things for question number 1. Go ahead. And don't worry if these aren't significant changes or massive changes within the organization. It could be any sort of change that you feel is having an impact either on you, your department, the people around you, the people who are counting on you for your leadership. Okay. Hopefully you have something written down, maybe a couple things even. Let's move on to the next topic. People resist change in different formats, different frames. The idea here is, if you look at the 5 phases of change that are listed here. The shock phase, that might be a little over the top, but shock phase, resistance, depression, adaptation, and then the learning phase. And some people rip right through this. If you look at the axis for time, some people might rip right through this without much much hesitancy or interruption, but some do struggle with it. And this is where you as the leader has to realize that this is not easy for everybody, and it's helping people move through this process. Now, you're not going to stick this graph under someone's nose and say, hey, this is where you are today, but at least if you can understand what that is all about, that's really very helpful. So, the shock phase is you're going to hear questions like, well, why are we doing this? How is this helpful? It may not be a shock as in people are falling down shock. It's just a shock to their system because they're not comfortable with it. The resistance phase might be people attempting to dig in and make the change and saying, no, it's not going to work, I can't do it. When, as we all know, change often is not questionable. We have to do it. We have to find a way through it. And then, of course, the depression phase, where people are, perhaps they're struggling with it, and they haven't quite come to grips with the whole thing, and they're trying to push through it mentally, and they might withdraw. And of course, the adaptation phase is you start seeing some momentum in the organization, and this is where people start realizing that this change is going to be good. They're seeing benefits from it. It's not perfect, but once it hits, once the organization or particular organization, department, if they're going through a particular change, hits that stride, this is where the learning phase comes through. So we all have this challenge. I think for anyone who's been through some major changes in their lifetime, whether you've changed jobs, you've moved, there's always different phases. And like I said, there's like roughly 40–50% of the population that it takes them longer. It doesn't mean they won't change, but they have to understand it. They have to see it. Your understanding of the process they go through, how they go through this change, and how they resist it is important, because you, as a leader, could get frustrated yourself with people who don't come along at the speed that you'd like them to. Question number 2 on the worksheet. What reactions from people are causing the greatest barriers for successful change? So what I'd like you to do is reflect on one of the changes that your organization is facing. Let's make this as real as we possibly can. And what reactions? I mean, literally, what are you seeing? What are you hearing? What are you seeing? What are you not hearing that you need to be hearing at times? But there's going to be barriers. And as you go through that process, you want to recognize, you want to get ahead of it. Just like anything, you want to fix something, you have to understand how it works. So take a moment here, think about the reactions of people within your organization and what you're seeing and witnessing, and jot a few things down. And again, this is something where you might want to take this exercise back to work, back to your day-to-day, and see how you might be able to apply it. So think about, jot down, be very specific about the person or people you're thinking about. Don't make it broad, because you can't work with a broad group of people. You work with one person at a time. So go ahead. What reactions for people are causing the greatest barriers for successful change? Jot down a few names and jot down some of the behaviors you're seeing. Go ahead. Okay, hopefully you have a few things down here. Why I'm putting some emphasis on being as specific as possible. It looks like my my screen has. Hold on 1 second, folks. It looks like the video has stopped. We'll try it again. Anyways, I'll work on that as I continue to talk here. The reason why I want you to be as specific as possible has everything to do with taking something valuable away from today's webinar. If you don't work at it, there's a very good possibility you're just going to walk away with some tips, some techniques. If you actually go ahead and apply it and work with an individual or a group or on a specific change effort and figure out how you as a leader needs to adapt, there's a big plus. So I'm not sure if the webcam's going to work. I'm just kind of playing with it here. I'll try it again in a moment or two. It looks like we kind of lost our feed there, but hopefully everyone can still hear me. So let's move on to some tools that you can use. That's always the question. That's great, Dave. Yes, I know I need to understand people more effectively. I need to understand what's happening, why it's happening, why people are changing or not changing effectively. But what are the things I need to do as a leader to make this work? And what is very important here, the first item here, communication. What we don't do, and this happens probably in every single organization. What happens is we think we're communicating. We think as leaders we're communicating effectively, and that's not necessarily the case. You want to keep open lines of communication, both directions. You want to be communicating what's going on, what's not going on, what's going to happen, but you want to be asking an awful lot of questions. Communication is more about questions than it is about telling people. It's great to share information, but people want to know that their input matters, and you want to understand where people's minds and hearts are, and you get that from questions. So keep that open line of communication. So you eliminate any sort of chance of missing something or essentially losing people. We talk about employee engagement. Well, engagement means the individual is emotionally, psychologically, and intellectually engaged, all three. And we want that, and that's what communication will do. It'll keep you focused, keep them focused on what is most important, and it gives them a baseline to overcome the challenges that they can. The education piece, why are we changing? Why does this make sense? Don't think for a minute that the rationale or the reason why change is occurring is well understood. Oftentimes, most often, that is the one thing that is left out. The pressures organizations face today are incredible, and the speed at which we have to adapt and change is equally incredible. Pressure comes from is global now. We have competition from all over the world. We have with the speed that we obtain through technology. People, organizations can become stronger competitors, and all the changes and the demands that come with that, they compile. So what we have to do is we have to educate people. Why does this make sense? How does it map into our strategy? How does this impact you? Why is this good for you, and why will it be difficult for you? So the reasons for change are absolutely critical. Training, we oftentimes assume people will just learn on the fly. Some people are great at that, but that's a small percentage of the population. Most people like to see how it's done. They like to learn from others. They want to know what's going to be most successful and what's going to be least successful. So you want to ensure that training comes with skills, information, knowledge, resources, so that they have the tools they need. And of course, flexibility. Going through a change effort or a change process requires effort from everybody. And what that means is everybody's going to have their eyes and ears open for better ways. Now, you really do need to stay the course. You don't want to be chasing things that are going to take you down a path that is not successful. But you want to be flexible in understanding that there could be better ways, and allowing people to share information, make make their contribution part of how the change is going to come together, how it's going to be successful, is absolutely very, very important here. So we want to make sure that one, you're communicating, two, you're educating people on the reasons, you're training them, and you're remaining flexible in all this. And I don't think our webcam is going to fire back up here, guys. I'm giving it a shot, but it doesn't seem to be working all that well. All right, so what I'd like you to do is get your hands on your worksheet, and this is question number 3. How can you help the change process? And I think everybody is probably in agreement on the line here that that the successful and effective implementation of any change effort is going to come down mostly to you, the leader. Now, one thing I want you to think about before you jot down anything for question 3 is, how do you think about yourself and change? How well do you deal with change? Because that's going to be very important as well. We're going to touch on that next. All right, so question number 3, how can you help the change process? There's 4 items right here on the screen. Think about the actual change initiative from question 1, the people involved in question 2, and how can you help? Go ahead. All right, so let's, I put a big circle around communication. Communication is the vehicle in which we build relationships, build trust, share information, evaluate one another's performance. It's how we keep everything together. I can't put enough emphasis on how important that is in the process of change. So think about that. If you do everything else wrong, make sure you get the communication piece right. So you should have questions 1, 2, and 3 completed by this time. Again, this is something you should be able to take back to your regular day-to-day and see how well you can implement it. These are some things that should be able to have an impact on the people there, your organization, and it should be directly connected to what you do every day. All right, let's go to the aspects on leading change. And this has a lot to do with how you think about change. What is your attitude toward it? Some of us do very well. We adapt quickly, or we're the change agents. We're the drivers of change. Many of us do not care for it, or feel as though that their success up to that point is based 100% on everything they've done in the past. So why do we want to change? So here are 5 things I want you to consider. First of all, if your organization has sloppy change management processes, or if change is not implemented well, historically, you're going to have a tough attitude in the organization. Change has to be well organized, well communicated. There has to be a strong feedback loop. So if you think about all the change in the past, whether it's change directly connected to you, your department, or the organization as a whole, I think what you need to think about is, how well have we done it in the past? Have we set a precedent here that we are poor at implementing change? And if that's the case, you want to talk about it. You want to talk about what didn't work well in the past and what's going to change in the future, because people are thinking about it. They may not be thinking about it exactly that way, but believe me, in their mind, they know change was not was not implemented effectively. Why is it going to change and be better in the future? I talked about this. Item number 2 is organizational change is a function of personal change. With any organizational change comes the need for process change, but change in people's attitude, approach, their own behaviors. And it's difficult. We're all habitual. We're all driven the same way, meaning we are, everything we've done up to this point has made us successful. So we don't think as though changing anything is a good idea. You want to be sure that as you are either part of or driving the change, the people who are or who you're responsible to, you understand what it is that they're going to be, how much change personally this is going to put on them. Item 3, no such thing as instantaneous transformation. For those of us on the line, and there's some of us, I could be one of them, impatience or patience is not my strong suit. I have to work at being patient. And sometimes change in some people's minds is instantaneous. Well, yeah, 1 + 1 = 2. Why can't we just make it happen? And that's not always the case. You've got to bring people with you. It is a transformation. It's a journey. And you've got to help people understand that it is a journey. You want to make sure change is pursued in item number 4, in the context of a clear goal. Why are we doing this? What are we trying to accomplish? If you can connect the change, and you should be able to connect the change to results, output, benefits to the organization, and then to that individual, because the goal of change is really designed to help improve, make things better. It doesn't happen quickly, so people feel that pain along the way until it's actually implemented. But people need to understand that there is a goal, and it's your job to help them see it. Those who push back, those who deny, those who resist, don't see it quickly, may not see it at all, may try not to see it. But it is your job to continue to sell it to them, not to jam it down their throat. But a great way to get people to see the benefits is to ask them questions. You want to understand how they're thinking. As I said earlier, you have to get them to come along intellectually and psychologically and emotionally. The intellectual piece is easy, but that in itself does not make change happen. You have to get people to come along. And then the last item here, involvement breeds commitment. And what that means is if you get people involved in the change, solving the change, being part of the change, making suggestions, allowing their input to be heard and valued, that drives commitment. You can jam change down people's throats, and they will change, but it may be reluctantly, and it's essentially more compliance versus commitment. You want commitment, you want engagement, and that's where the involvement. Get people involved. Absolutely critical. All right, so question 4 on the worksheet. What is your attitude towards leading change? And these 5 questions or 5 statements, I should say, aspects, might help you figure that out. And do you need to make any adjustments in your approach to change? A big chunk of this is how well do you see it? How well do you adapt to it? If you haven't bought in, if your attitude needs to adjust so that others come with you more readily, that's something really to think about. Very, very important. So I'll give you a minute or so here to think about your own attitude and what it is you might want to change. Question number 4, go ahead. All right, folks, we're coming near the end here. So the last bullet on the last slide was all about involvement. How do you get people involved? And some of the questions that you might want to think about yourself, or pose to others and get people to think through to get them involved and get them engaged are listed right here. So I say defining your strategy. Well, it's really not a huge strategy, but if you take time to think about what's really going on in the organization, the situation, help people understand who the sponsors are, who are the change agents, who are the people that could have the greatest impact, and what is their role in all of that. And then obviously there's going to be issues that might arise. So let's go through some of these questions. What is being changed? Oftentimes change is viewed as negative, and it's not. It typically isn't. Some change is more difficult than others, but I think what's really important is what really needs to change. And then the perceived need for change comes from different areas of the business. One very simple change in an organization might have an impact across the board, or it might just impact one particular area. So you want to think about, and these are not things I want you to think about all by yourself. I want you to think about this in the context of what's really happening and how people are going to adapt and adopt the change that's coming. And how long will it take change? I think it's important to talk about that. If you don't talk about the significance of how much time it's going to take, certain people will set their own expectations, thinking, well, the change is only going to take a week, a month. Certain initiatives might take months, and some very major initiatives can take years. You want to set the expectation effectively. So just discuss these sorts of questions. The people and their roles, very important. You know, who's going to be the high-level sponsor? If we hit a roadblock, how do we get help? How do we bust through some of the challenges? Maybe there's a deadlock on a decision that needs high-level involvement. And then, of course, who's going to be involved? Which groups, which individuals, and what roles are going to be played? People want to be involved in the change effort. Again, going back to how people react, some people don't want to be, but the more people you can get involved in the process and understanding the process, the more effective it's going to be to getting people to come along with you. And then obviously, the last time here, analysis. Well, what would happen if we do this change? What are we expecting? And what happens if we don't do it? Just because change efforts are driven down from the top doesn't mean they're the best idea. And that's where the flexibility might come in. And I've been involved in situations where all of the change came down from the top. There was enough influence through the analysis of, does this really make sense? And shared back with the organization or back with the leaders to say, we don't think it makes sense. Now, that's going to happen rarely, but it can happen. And there's always going to be exceptions and deviations or exceptions to the rule. So we want to make sure that there's a process to take people through. Now, and this doesn't have to be in one sitting, and it could be based on individual, one-on-one conversations. But if you're struggling with change, this is a great starting point to get people involved in the process of understanding what it means to them, how they can be involved, and how they can be part of the success itself. So the last question is, what have you not considered or needs more attention with this change? These are some questions for you to think about, and I suggest that you explore this even further yourself. But why don't you take some time here, jot down, well, what have I not considered in all of this? And it can apply to anything 1 through 4 above, but also what we have on the screen right here, and how what is it that you need to put greater emphasis on as you walk away from today's webinar. Go ahead. I'll give you a moment or two. All right, good. Well, I'll give you, I'm going to ask you to take this worksheet when you're done for today. And you know, I'm really hopeful that everyone has some notes jotted down here. They're going to be useful to you. But take this and take another 5 minutes after we're done today and just jot, you know, and just make sure what you've written down here is meaningful. You know, item 1, is this change really important and is it going to have an impact? How is it impacting the people around me? That's very important because you've got to be observant. I mean, that's what leaders do. They're very observant about the people around them. What can I do? What can I do? This is item 3. What can I do to be part of this process? And item 4, is my attitude in check? Is my attitude in the right place? Now, I'm not suggesting good or bad attitude. All I'm suggesting is attitude is a function of our beliefs. And if our beliefs, if we have beliefs that are supporting change or not supporting change, then that can certainly be a problem. And then, of course, you know, the last one is, have you missed anything? And, you know, every step of the way, I mean, this is just a process. So do take this, you know, every step of this process is very important. Do take this worksheet and just validate what you've written down, and then I will ask you to take that with you to ensure that it does, you know, it is something you take away and it will have an impact. Just one question before I go to the Q&A. Last month we were contacted by a large consulting organization that does multi-million-dollar technology software implementations, and this individual was out of Italy, and he said, "Look, I'm looking for some help to train a group of senior leaders on how to deal with change." And I thought, well, this is quite amazing, knowing the company that this person is from. And I said, well, you know, and one of the questions was, you know, tell me what is, you know, why is this so important? He said, well, the people who are the ones resisting the change most is from the CEO down. These are the people that are running the organization that are the greatest barriers to change, and we need help training them. And we went through the whole process of understanding it, what it was, but it was amazing that these are the people who are typically the ones affecting the change with their business decisions, but when it comes to the technology changes that are required, they're the greatest barriers to the success of the implementation. These are $30, $40, $50 million software implementations. So just kind of interesting. If you think about yourself and your ability to impact change, you have a great ability to impact change, and it's every single person in the company who takes the position of being a leader, understanding the management piece, but knowing how important the leadership piece is. All right, so let's. I'm just going to hit the last slide here. I'm sure we have a couple questions. I just want to remind everybody before we go to Q&A, September 15th at 2 p.m. it will be our webinar, and this one, I noticed a typo here, strategic preparation. It's not strategic planning as much as is, are you getting ready? Are you ready for next year? Are you ready for what's coming? And I want to get people in the frame of mind of thinking strategically about what they're going to need to be doing, how they're going to get the people in the organization on board, and how that's going to have an impact on them. But that's going to be in just about, looks like 2 or 3 weeks. And Allison, are there any questions for today?
Yes, there are. We actually have a really good question to kick it off. We have, what can a team do when the executive level sponsors don't see the change management as all too important?
Okay. Actually, just repeat that again so I get the context. You said,
what can a team do when the executive level sponsors do not see the change management as all too important?
Well, it's actually not any different than what you might want to do with your employees. It makes it a little more difficult because it is executive management. But what you want to do is you want to get their input on the change itself. Change management in itself, or leading change, as I like to refer to it, is mostly a function of getting people on board with you. If the executive management is not seeing it, there's a reason. They're not connecting the change with a strategic business issue or concern. They don't understand the results. And what I would prescribe in this particular case is you need to have a set of questions, whether it's one-on-one interviews, surveys, something that's going to get them engaged in this process, because they have to. It's like anything. If you don't see the benefit, or you don't see the benefit to you or the people around you, you're not going to be excited about it. Well, there's a disconnect there. There's a communication disconnect, and you want to open up those lines of communications to the executive team, get them involved, interview them, talk to them about, and not tell them what's going to happen, but ask them very important questions, pointed questions about how they view, how they might view the change as being beneficial or not beneficial. They might not, they might have some great input that is on the negative side that you can use, but all of this is really to get them engaged in the process of change. And the best way to do it is through communication and questions.
Okay, our next
Anything
question
else?
Our next question is, in a large organization, how do you get everybody on board with the program?
Well, that's probably an extension of the last question to a certain degree. Very large organizations have many more people involved, more stakeholders, and it is difficult to get everyone on board 100%. What you have to do here is, if in a very large organization, you want to have if it's a large implementation and it's going to impact many different areas, you want to involve people from different areas of the organization as your ambassadors, or a group of core change agents. If you can get a smaller group of people that cut across the organization, they will be instrumental in driving that change, asking the right questions. But you've got to get them on board first. So you get the smaller group on board, and then there will be agents to go out and get others on board. Larger organizations, it takes longer, but you have to still go back. If we talked about certain aspects of this, there are certain questions that still need to be answered for all the people in the organization. You want to ensure that your ambassadors have those lines of communication, two-directional. Anything else?
Yes, one last question. What do you see as the biggest reason why people resist change?
It really depends on the individual to a great degree, but one of the biggest things, and this is experience doing what I've been doing for the last 15 years, it's loss of control. Now, it doesn't mean they've lost control, but change, one of the side effects of change is people feel as though they've lost control, because the change is coming from the top, adjacent to them, and almost being out of control for certain people. And that's got to be the biggest one. The reason why you want to engage people with questions, making sure their input is involved, they're being heard, is that puts them in control. In the process of the change effort, people look at different options. That's options that gives the perspective, gives the perception of being in control. So the biggest drawback, or the biggest reason why people resist change, probably is being or feeling out of control or losing control.
All right.
Was that the last one?
That was the last one. I do want to make a quick note to everyone who is participating. We are currently in the process of updating our website and email server. So if anybody has any questions, I will be sending follow-up out to everyone once our emails are back up. So if you do send an email and you get an interesting response back, we are aware, and we will make sure that we get in touch with everybody. And you can always call the office as well.
Well, fantastic. Thank you, Allison. Thank you, everybody, for being on the line today. Great questions. Really do appreciate that. I'm hopeful that I see you next month as well. We're going to have a very interesting hour on strategy, strategic thinking, and preparing for the next year. Hope you have a great day. Any questions, please let us know. We'll have all of this recorded and up on the website soon, as our website's operating to where it needs to be. And if anyone has any questions, wants to talk about anything offline, for some very specific problem or challenge you're having, I'd be happy to troubleshoot it with you over the phone. That's something we just like to do for people, just to make sure that you're getting the most out of this. So do enjoy your day. Take care. Bye-bye.